Hi, everyone. I believe I know pretty much everyone here, but if not, my name is Brennan Lamey. I am the founder of Kwil. And so, yeah, today, just going to give a brief overview of kind of what's been going on in Kwil, as well as we have a little bit of a surprise at the end for you. But so, just to give you some context, so I'm first just going to give a very brief introduction of what Kwil is, the architecture, and why it's important. We often refer to it as relational databases as Appchains, but I'll get into that in a sec. I'll also cover our extension system. This is what we've been doing in the last few months. And then finally, I have a pretty big surprise, especially if you're like a hacker, pretty big opportunity for you. You might be able to pay for your conference and then some. Let me just get into what is Kwil and how does it work, just to cover the general architecture. You can conceptually think of it like Byzantine fault-tolerant Postgres, or it is Appchains on top of Arweave, where each individual Kwil network has its own consensus. It runs on Tendermint, if anyone's familiar with Tendermint. It runs its own consensus, and it executes logs against a Postgres database. And we reroute all the queries to be deterministic, and then we have a proof process, which I will not get back into here, where you can prove state back. And so we essentially have this way of running Postgres in a Byzantine fault-tolerant environment, and then you can then store that block data on Arweave. This gives you a variety of actual throughput benefits. So one of the biggest constrainers of throughput on networks like this is old block data, or like data that's not used. And we can actually prune that without suffering security setbacks using Arweave. I won't get too into that in this talk. The reason why you build on Kwil, and one of the main things that people use it for, is for our Qniform smart contract language. So Kwil, it features its own smart contract language. It is SQL-based, and we call it Qniform. And I'm not sure if you're sitting in the front, you could probably see it. This probably makes a lot of sense. It's pretty explanatory, pretty easy to figure out. But essentially what it is a deterministic SQL database that runs on these Appchains. And you can build access control rules for who can write to it, for how they can write to it. You can set role systems. We've seen some pretty interesting things be built around this, but it allows you to build smart contracts on relational databases. The other reason why you would want to build an Appchain on Arweave is because they're very extensible. You can change the rules of an Appchain in much more ways than you can just change the rules of a smart contract. And in Kwil, there are 4 specific designated sections of the product where you can do this, and we're about to add a 5th, but to cover the quick 4 right now. So the first one, we call these action extensions. So if you followed Kwil for a while, these are like our OG extension type. They were like the main focus of like our part in HackAR last July. It is essentially a way of having precompiles for your smart contracts. For example, we've seen people actually build full WASM runtimes in there that you can call from a database. You do get into the question of, is a database really what you need for your solution at that point? But you can do really whatever you want. You can have any sort of precompile. So that's our original one. We also have what we call authentication extensions. And so this allows you to build custom asymmetric signature schemes. So for example, Kwil by default supports Ethereum's signature scheme, but we've seen people build support for NEP 413, which is Near's. We've seen support for Solana. We've seen support for multisigs. And actually, the only major ecosystem nobody has built support for yet is, and I think the reason being is because Arweave uses RSA, and I believe it's the only major chain that uses RSA. And so that is actually something that like we would love to support, and you could literally do in 80 lines of code. But that is like the only major ecosystem that has not been implemented yet, but it's like trivially easy to do. The third type of extension, we call these oracles. Once again, pretty self-explanatory to authentication extensions. You can build event-driven oracles around any external system or any external event-driven system. And luckily, most blockchains are event-driven. And a great example of what people have built with this are systems where you can purchase gas for your database using some token that exists on Ethereum or on Solana. Actually, the MEM team is building one that's built on Solana. And what's cool with this is you can actually create demand for that token based on the functionality of your database, but you don't have to unplug yourself from these well-established centers of liquidity and composability and really where everyone else is buying tokens. And then finally, the last type of extension, we call these resolution extensions. It is a way of performing network governance. You can vote to govern pretty much whatever you want on the network, and it is dictated by validator power. So this can be as simple as slashing a validator stake. You can mint new tokens. You can have a hard fork. You can really code whatever logic you want in there. But these are all well-defined interfaces in Kwil, and they're supported as like first-class citizens that you can really code and program whatever you want against these. You're not really hacking around the system. This is like supported interfaces that you can customize your app chain with. And there are a couple of pretty interesting things that some pretty major projects have actually built using these. So one of the first ones I like to highlight, most people are probably familiar with Trueflation. They're pretty big in DeFi, and they're actually pretty big in TradFi as well. But what they built is a system for composing time series data, and you can provide more data to the system, but also you can take other pieces of time series data, you can weight it, and you can compose new streams out of that. So for example, what they do is they calculate inflation data. And so they might have their metals for Europe, and they might have their food for the US, and then they might have cars in Latin America or something. And then they can choose to compose those into one single stream of values, and they can weight those each individually. And then they can just do that recursively. So they can take that output and then put that as another input to a different stream. And they do this using the Qniform smart contract language, and this has actually become the crux of their developer platform. But this was an extension that they built using Kwil. Another example of some pretty cool extensions that have been made are by the IDOS team, which is made by Fractal ID. They're one of the largest KYC providers in the space. But one of their largest clients is Near Protocol. And so they were able to make Near wallets first-class citizens on their network in, I think it's 89 lines of code, simply by just implementing NEP 413. And now they can have credentials, they have funds on the network, you can transfer between the different accounts. There's like fully supported first-class citizens. Obviously very important if Near is your biggest customer. And then finally, and some of their team is actually here today, but we have Intergalactic ID. They're building something that is wicked cool. And so shout out to the MEM team. Yeah, MEM is pretty cool, I would recommend checking it out. But what they are building for Intergalactic is a stake system based on SPL. So SPL is Solana's token standard. You can think of it like their equivalent of ERC20. But what they have built for Intergalactic, or what they're in the process of building, is a system where you can stake tokens on Solana, and that will update validator stake in their native network. And so this actually gives them a unique form of governance as well as security for their network that was not like core supported in Kwil. They're just able to actually build this as a feature of their app chain. And I'd recommend checking out MEM and Intergalactic. And so you can actually start building all of these today, and obviously people have actually been building these since last July. But so in our current production release that has been out for the last about 2 months, you can build both the action authentication extensions, and then all these new ones you can build. So our new release went into beta about a week and a half ago. It went into release candidate today, and it gets released in exactly 1 week. But you can build the rest of them in this, and if you want to start building, you can just go to our GitHub, which is at the bottom there. We are open source now. But yeah, you can start building any of these today and building your own custom app chain, and you can literally deploy these in 2 commands in a terminal. They're very easy to deploy. And now getting to the fun part, and I think what a lot of people were waiting on. We are putting up a pretty large bounty to port Kwil's Qniform engine to AO. So Kwil's Qniform engine, you can think of it like our version of EVM. You don't use it for the same thing, but it's a deterministic SQL database that's made for replicated state machines. And AO is built on this similar model. And so we don't just want our deterministic SQL database to only exist on Kwil networks. We also want them to exist on AO. And so we've put up a 250 AR bounty to port this from Kwil and build it on AO, actor-oriented, it's AO. It officially begins next Friday. You get a little bit of alpha now, and you can actually start digging into exactly how that works, but it officially begins next Friday, and it will just go on indefinitely until somebody completes that. But yeah, this is something we really want people to build. We've put a lot of work into building a priceable and deterministic relational database. If anyone's worked much with SQL, it's not deterministic. And we would love to see this be applied just outside of our own networks. And yeah, if anyone would like to claim this, you could probably pay for this conference and then a couple others. But yeah, that is all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to building with you.